Hey, hey, hey! My name's Helianthus Cryptid, or Nephilim if you'd prefer. Welcome to my cozy corner of the internet. This is the 10th chapter of my favourite Kiribaku Mulan AU, written by XX Cypress Minerva XX on AO3, which is entitled Eijirou. It's been a long time coming, but I'm finally back and so excited to read this chapter. So much has been happening and it's nice to be back to recording and having fun. Now I implore you to sit back and relax whilst I read to you. Chapter 10. Repay our debts, so we may rest in peace. When eijirou woke up, the only thing he noticed was the ringing in his head, like a fog that was obscuring his thoughts. The redhead squeezed his eyes shut as his memory came flooding back to the surface, giving him a rundown on the events that led him to being in this state. The fight with the League, that had ended in an avalanche of eijirou's own doing. The panic and race to find Bakugo amongst the snow, and then, when it had all calmed, his injury finally caught up to him, and then blank. That was where the memory reel stopped. Whatever was happening now, this was the first time he had woken up since he passed out. Eijirou took a breath before peeling his eyes open, squinting against the harsh light shining from beyond the tent flap. He was greeted by the sound of footsteps crunching in the snow, loud voices quieting as they passed his tent. Eijirou tilted his head to look around. Medical equipment set up around him glimmered with a silverish glow, making his stomach churn as a reminder. Right, he was beaten up pretty badly. He lay in a cot on the floor, a blanket pulled up to his chin and something restricting his limbs. So much that his body creaked when he tried to sit up. A bandage, probably, for the wounds on his body. Eijirou frowned as he looked down at himself. "I'm a mummy!" "You're awake!" Eijirou jerked at the explosive voice, not having seen anyone else in the tent. From behind a box, Denki and Jiro came scurrying out with a quieted roar. Jiro looked like she was just about ready to strangle the redhead, steam practically shooting out of her nostrils. Denki, on the other hand, buzzed and hummed with excitement, looking incredibly relieved. Scratch that. Denki was humming with electricity, and he looked horrifyingly pissed. "Oh hey!" Eijirou mumbled, lips quirking into an uncertain grin, not sure what else to say. He still felt disoriented from passing out. "Don't you oh hey me, you jerk! You idiot! Don't you ever do that again!" Denki practically shouted, and then he punched Eijirou's shoulder, and even though there was no power in it, Eijirou was almost certain he could feel a shock of electricity through his bandages. Jiro's chirps sound scolding and almost angry, breaking off at the end as she takes a few deep breaths to calm herself. "Yeah, we thought you were gonna die! Jiro was really worried!" Jiro squinted her eyes at him, chirping skeptically. I was not crying! You were way more of a mess than me! I wasn't worried at all!" "Denki," Eijirou cut off the Pikachu's rant. "Thank you." Denki paused and seemed to contemplate this. "You owe me, eh? You know how panicked we were when you just collapsed? Not to mention, we needed to get out from your shirt before your army friends saw us. That was nerve-wracking." Eijirou smiled weakly. "Aw, Denki, you're such a sweet friend." Denki immediately opened his mouth to retort. Jiro snickered beside him, but froze instead. Eijirou fixed her with a questioning look, but the Pikachu merely grabbed Jiro and dragged her out of sight, behind the box they were hiding behind earlier. Before Eijirou could question what they were doing, the tent flap was yanked back. Jiro must have heard someone coming. Eijirou turned his head slightly to see who had just come in. Bakugo stood in the tent entrance, but his expression was unreadable, part relief, but there also seemed to be some expectation? Apprehension? Eijirou was usually good at reading people, but his still muddled brain couldn't figure out what the captain's problem was. Eijirou leaned forwards, the blankets falling away. "Hey, Bakugo!" he said cheerfully, just happy to see the captain, in non-life or death circumstance. Come to visit me? You fucking wish! Bakugo wasn't even looking at him. His gaze was aimed down to where his blankets had just fallen away. Eijirou followed his line of sight and froze when he saw his torso was naked, save for the tight white bandages that went from his stomach to just under his arms, hiding his skin from view. It was nothing to hide the visible scars across his chest and lower stomach. Eijirou shut his eyes and sighed. It's not what you think it is, Bakugo. What is it then? Bakugo's gaze was hard, almost angry, but Eijirou had the feeling it wasn't directed at him. Something else had to be going on, right? Bakugo wouldn't ever look like he did now. Almost concerned? Fuck. It was an accident, with my quirk, before the battle. The redhead cringed at his awkwardness, grunting with frustration. I just want to get stronger, is all. You already are, Bakugo blurted. Then he growled, as if regaining his composure. You're already strong. You didn't go down when that arsehole almost beat you to a pulp. You kept going. But I went down in the end, remember? Eijirou protested, lifting his heavily bandaged arms for emphasis. I failed to stay standing. And at what cost? Strength is— Shut up! Bakugo snapped. And Eijirou understood the captain's apprehensive look from earlier all too well. He was waiting to see if the redhead would crack. After all that's happened, you seriously still fucking believe— Which? Bakugo was cut off by Endeavour. Bursting into the tent behind the blonde. We found the woman! Eijirou winced as Bakugo thundered from the tent with a roar, struggling to follow after him. He tears the bandages from his limbs with his teeth, waddling out of the tent into the cold snow. Endeavour had caught someone by the arm, yanking them harshly to their feet as they stumbled in the snow, and Eijirou inhaled sharply. It was him! Her! The girl from the matchmaking ceremony. The same one he had risked his life to save. She was here! Hey! Eijirou shouted after the older man. Be careful! Don't touch him! Her! Endeavour only glared at him and dragged the girl from the tent. She looked too shocked to fight back, her eyes glazed and unfocused from pain. Eijirou reached for her, but the most he could do was brush her arm with his hand before she was wrenched away again. There were droplets of blood leaking from the bandages around her chest, and Eijirou could only pray that the wound didn't get aggravated. Endeavour threw her in the snow right outside the tent, and Eijirou ran after him. Bakugo stood and watched from the shadows, his face a clash between confusion and rage. Behold! Endeavour's voice was loud and booming, dripped in more venom than Eijirou thought possible. A woman! All of the surviving soldiers were hovering around the tent, watching as the girl was thrown in the snow. Word must have travelled fast. Eijirou didn't spare them a second glance, though. He threw himself to the ground in front of the girl, shielding her form from the others, even as they moved in to restrain him, to take her away, to punish her. Panic bloomed in his chest. Don't touch her! He was baring his teeth, almost like a wild animal protecting its young. He swung his bandaged arm in a wide arc, bandages ripping as his skin sharpened and sliced through the air like a blade. No one fucking touches her! Kirishima, stay out of this! Bakugo said simply. It was almost scary how little emotion was in his voice. No! I won't stay out of it! What you're doing is wrong! Eijirou shouted back. She's just as much of a man as you are! Bakugo seemed to contemplate this, but Endeavor shook his head furiously. You know what the punishment is for sneaking into the army. You dare defend this crime? I do! Then you will die alongside the traitor. Eijirou's breath seized, and he felt the girl stiffen. He had been fearing discovery for months now, and the largest part was because of what would happen if he was. The punishment for sneaking into the army was drastic, fatal. And now his nightmare was finally coming true. After all, he wasn't a legitimate child of Fat Gum. He could only imagine what they would do to this girl. Endeavor roughly unsheathed his father's sword from Tokoyami's saddle, avoiding the horse's enraged kicks. The horse's eyes rolled and he snorted, shrieking out a terrible cry, to which Endeavor paid no mind. He held the sword out to Bakugo, practically shoving it into the captain's hands. The blonde stared at the sword like he had never seen one before. You know what you have to do, Endeavor quipped, but his tone was solemn, as if he had already accepted what was going to happen. You can't! Eijirou's head snapped up to the sound of his friend's voice. Zero shoved his way through the group of soldiers, the distressed and frustrated faces of Todoroki and Midoriya popping up in the redhead's vision. Zero opened his mouth to shout again. You can't do this! You know the law, Endeavor spat. For deceiving the Imperial Army and sneaking into its ranks, the punishment is death. Things were getting really bad. Eijirou had thought he was done with life or death situations. I've proven I'm a good soldier. Isn't that enough? The girl's voice rang out, shaky at first, then gradually gaining strength. Her voice was sweet, but demanding and impossible not to listen to. I did this to save my father. I found the League with each and every one of you. I'm a soldier. Endeavor shook his head, like talking with her was a waste of time. Why converse with a soon-to-be dead man? You know what to do, Captain. Endeavor gestured to the sword in Bakugo's hand. Unless you, too, wish to break the law. He leaned in closer. Perhaps you aren't competent for this position after all. Bakugo clenched his jaw, but took a step closer to Eijirou, still kneeling in the snow. Right behind Bakugo, the redhead could see Denki and Jiro peering out from the tent flap, horror dancing in their eyes. He wondered if Zero, Midoriya, or even Todoroki wore similar expressions. Bakugo lifted the sword higher into the air, and Eijirou sucked in a breath, terror lacing through his bones. But he was nothing if not prideful. He wouldn't disgrace himself anymore with a pitiful attempt to escape or plea for his life. I'm glad I met you, Bakugo, he said instead, with a sincere smile. He stared at the blonde, unblinking, and prepared for Bakugo's angelic face to be the last thing he ever saw. The blow never came. Everything was silent for a second, and then 2, and then 3. Tentatively, Eijirou blinked owlishly at the blonde, peering at Bakugo with anticipation. The captain still held the sword high above his head, positioned perfectly to give a killing blow. Eijirou knew he had the strength to do it, but when the redhead looked closer, he noticed Bakugo's arm was trembling. No, his whole body was trembling. His crimson eyes shook with uncertainty, and when they met Eijirou's, they widened ever so slightly. The sword hit the snow with a soft plunk. Eijirou blinked as Bakugo stepped away, staring at the redhead like he was a ghost, before turning away. A life for a life! My debt is repaid! He spoke softly before huffing a bitter laugh. How fucking stupid is that, dumbass? eijirou could only stare up at him with wide eyes, unconsciously gripping the girl tighter. "Move out!" Bakugo ordered in the same shaken but determined tone he had at the burned village. "We're going to the Imperial City!" "But Captain—" "I said move out!" Bakugo's tone was deathly serious, daring Endeavor, anyone really, to argue with him. Endeavor's mouth opened and closed like he wanted to continue the conversation, but he eventually relented, storming off. Even he didn't want to argue with the captain when he was like this. The next bit passed in a blur. Midoriya brought him Tokoyami, and some warm clothes and supplies for the two of them. He whispered apologies that eijirou only half listened to, before running off to join the troops. Eijirou's mind was still reeling as the Imperial army took off, making for the Imperial City, to be celebrated for defeating the League of Villains. Without him, or the girl, Uraraka. Her name was... It wasn't fair. Uraraka whipped her head around the moment the troops were out of sight, not even blinking when eijirou was immediately tackled by Denki and Jiro. "Kirishima, oh my god!" Uraraka and Denki shouted in unison, wide-eyed and panicked. Uraraka grabbed his shoulders and shook him as Denki climbed his shirt to observe his neck for any wounds. "That was such a close call. Are you alright?" Jiro hopped around in the snow in a panic, chirping up a storm. Denki didn't bother to translate, hopping back to the ground and patting eijirou's thigh reassuringly. "Look on the bright side," he said, a forced cheeriness in his tone. "Now you don't have to worry about being discovered." Eijirou merely shrugged as Uraraka began to scold him, tugging the cloak he was given even tighter around himself as he cuddled up against Tokoyami. He didn't bother to question why Uraraka was completely fine with his strange companions, or why they were so worried about him. He just felt numb. "Maybe I was selfish," he said quietly, still lifelessly staring at the snow. Uraraka stared at him. "What do you mean?" "This all started because I wanted to protect my father, same as you." Eijirou thought back to the desperate defences he had made when he was sure he was going to die. Not with honour, not fighting to protect his country, but by the hands of his allies. But lately, I've been thinking of this as something to be done to protect my family, or even bring them honour. Denki nodded along silently while Uraraka hummed, stroking Jiro's antennas. Eijirou shifted, resting his head on his knees. "Lately, this has been something I've wanted to do. It made me feel like I was worth something. Something more than just some charity case orphan. It felt good." Eijirou laughed weakly, almost bitter. "It felt good. I was doing it for myself this whole time, wasn't I?" Denki looked sad, turning away. "Well, I guess that makes two of us." "Oh?" The Pikachu shook his head furiously. "It's nothing!" "Ah, Denki," Eijirou said quietly, but the teasing didn't have its usual energy. "I shared my secrets. Now it's your turn." Denki sighed, embarrassed. "The truth is, your ancestors didn't send me." Eijirou's eyes widened and Uraraka and him shared a glance. "They wanted to send someone else. Truth is, I'm not even a proper guardian. Not anymore. But I wanted to prove myself. Prove that I had what it takes. So I came instead." Denki shrugged. "I guess I'm not a good guardian." This wasn't exactly the ideal result. Eijirou nodded silently. Yes, they were both pretending to be something they weren't. Jiro hopped around with a fury, chirping profusely. "We are in this together." Denki agreed with whatever the cricket was saying. "We do have that at least. That's not fake." "Not fake at all," Uraraka said, and Eijirou couldn't help but smile. He may have lost all else, but he still had Denki, Jiro, and Uraraka, Tokoyami too. Things could be worse. They had survived a war. He could survive this. So Eijirou hopped to his feet, stretching out his limbs, still stiff from passing out. "Let's go home," he said. "Let's stop pretending." Anything he was about to say next was drowned out by a screech, resonating through the sky. Eijirou glanced up, catching a glimpse of a large eagle gliding through the sky. The redhead recognized that bird. It was the same one Shigaraki had. Guess it survived the avalanche. Eijirou wasn't particularly concerned until he heard a roar resonating through the mountains immediately after. A roar that was definitely human-made. He gasped and stumbled back, careful to hide on top of the shelf of snow their group was sitting on, peering down below. A hand stuck out of the snow as someone dug themselves out. Not just one, but several people started to dig themselves out of the snow. Eijirou's heart leapt to his throat. Survivors! He hadn't stopped the League after all! They shook the snow from their clothes and Eijirou counted their silhouettes against the snow. Only 5 in total, but one of them stuck out. Eijirou gasped as Shigaraki barked a few orders to the surviving soldiers. They lounged around for a few moments and Eijirou made sure to stay deathly silent. Uraraka watched with him, the two of them taking in the commotion below. Eventually, the surviving forces of the League took off, heading out of the path, following the trail the Imperial Army took, right towards the city. Eijirou dared to speak only when the League was out of sight. "They're still alive!" "What are we gonna do?" Eijirou paused. He knew what he should do. The League's forces may have been small, but Shigaraki with them, Eijirou didn't want to underestimate them. But at the same time, Eijirou felt bitter. The Imperial Army tried to kill him. Why would he help them? But it wasn't the Imperial Army now, was it? Bakugo spared his life. Sero, Todoroki, and Midoriya tried to help him. The only one who actively tried to have him killed was Endeavor. The only thing that deemed he must die was centuries of tradition and prejudice. How could Eijirou damn his friends because of tradition? How could he stand by and not try to fix the prejudice that almost killed him? Eijirou had proved time and time again that he was not a quitter. He had proven to himself that he had what it took to overcome obstacles. "We're going to the Imperial City," Eijirou decided. There was no more doubt in his mind. We're going to prove we weren't playing pretend. Uraraka's grin was vicious. "Then let's get going then! We have a country to save!" So Eijirou saddled up Tokoyami and they were off at once. They rode to the Imperial City, not as 2 kids in disguise or soldiers who should be dead. They went as themselves. They didn't need to play pretend to save their friends. Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate all the support you've given me. I apologise for how long this has taken me, as well as forgetting which voice I did for Sero, but nonetheless, I had so much fun, and this story is always a pleasure to read. If you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments below. All credits go to the original creator of this fanfiction, XX Cypress Minerva XX on AO3. I would highly appreciate it if you gave this video a like and you subscribe to the channel and you hit the notification bell to be notified of when I next upload. There is no pressure to do so, though. Thank you for visiting my cozy corner of the internet. I hope you have had a wonderful Christmas Eve and you have a cheerful Christmas and New Year. Keep growing, my sunflowers. Mwah!